Welcome back to TN Shadow Stories, where the veils of truth are lifted and the darkness begins to speak. I'm TN, and today we're diving into a journey not for the faint of heart. This isn't just another ghost story, it's a chilling, true experience that haunted even the bravest among us. It all started with a phone call on a fateful afternoon in Boston, when I received a desperate plea for help from two young sisters living in a house they unknowingly shared with a horrifying secret. What truly terrified them, and what happened when we, the seekers of truth, dared to confront that unseen force. Join me as we uncover the story of the hauntings of the Providence house, where the line between this world and the next blurs, and fear can cling to you, refusing to let go. Are you ready? Turn down the lights, put on your headphones, and step into the shadows with TN Shadow Stories. Hauntings of the Providence house. Friday afternoon, mid-July 2023. The golden sunlight of dusk filtered through the office window in downtown Boston. The air conditioner hummed steadily, but it didn't soothe the unease creeping into John, a seasoned paranormal investigator. The phone call that had just ended still echoed in his ears, like a chilling whisper from another world. John, casually dressed after a day's work, remained unsettled. His long hair was hastily tied back, his eyes shadowed from sleepless nights spent pondering supernatural cases. He always considered himself calm and rational, but the voice of Sherry, the young woman who had just called, truly touched a deep part of him, where skepticism usually held sway, now shaken by primal fear. Sherry, her voice trembling and broken, described the terrifying experiences she and her sister Niecy were facing in their new rental home in suburban Providence, Rhode Island. Every word she spoke carried an extreme panic. "Something touched me, sir. It grabbed me. It pulled my hair. Right now, while I'm talking to you," her voice cracked, choking, as if being suffocated by an invisible hand. John could picture her pale face, wide eyes filled with terror, her body coiling in helplessness. Her detailed descriptions of being touched inappropriately sent shivers down John's spine. This was not merely a presence, but a deliberate disturbance, a repulsive act of violation. Initially, John offered to visit in person, but Sherry and Niecy seemed hesitant. That was understandable. Two young women, in their late 20s, newly moved to an unfamiliar place, would naturally be wary of anyone approaching them. Such caution was necessary, especially in their vulnerable situation. John respected their decision and arranged a meeting at the Whispering Bean, a popular cafe in downtown Boston. It was a public, bustling place, enough for them to feel safer sharing their story. Saturday afternoon, 2 days later, the atmosphere in the cafe was much warmer than the chilling cold of the house John imagined. The clinking of cups, the murmur of conversations, and the fragrant aroma of roasted coffee filled the air. John had arrived a little early, sitting in a secluded corner, observing people coming and going. At exactly 3 p.m., the two young women walked in. Sherry, as John had imagined, looked quite fragile, her long brown hair draped over her shoulders, partly obscuring her pale face. Her eyes were swollen, with dark circles indicating many sleepless nights. She wore a thin jacket, though the weather wasn't cold, as if trying to shield herself from something invisible. Her every step was timid, cautious, like a frightened fawn in the forest. Niecy, in contrast, seemed stronger. Her short, edgy haircut and sharp eyes still couldn't hide a deep-seated anxiety. She wore a simple t-shirt and jeans, appearing energetic, but her face was no better than Sherry's. As they sat across from John, he could feel the tension radiating from both of them. "Hello," John said, his voice trying to be as gentle as possible to reassure them. "I'm John. Thank you for coming," Sherry whispered her reply, her eyes constantly darting around, as if fearing some invisible shadow might appear right there in the crowded cafe. Niecy was more direct. "We don't know much about the house, sir, only that it's been vacant for a while." They recounted their experiences, from occasional strange noises to feelings of being watched, and culminating in the physical touches Sherry endured. Nietzsche also had similar experiences, though less frequent and intense than Sherry's. Sometimes I'd hear a sigh somewhere in the house, or footsteps passing by when no one was there, Nikki whispered, her voice low despite the surrounding noise. But Sherry's experiences were different, much more terrifying. John diligently noted every detail, asking for specific times and locations of each incident. When he asked about the house's history, both shook their heads. "We don't know anything," Sherry said. "We just rented the house through a real estate agent." They gave John the agent's phone number. He thanked them and assured them he would do everything he could to help. As they left, John watched their retreating figures. Sherry walked unsteadily, as if she had just escaped a nightmare. Niecy held Sherry's shoulder, her eyes still showing extreme concern. Monday morning, the following week, John decided to contact the rental agent before conducting any investigation. He hoped she could provide more information about the house's history, previous owners, or any related stories. This was crucial for them to understand the nature of the entity haunting the house. John called the number Sherry had provided. The phone rang for a few moments before a cold, somewhat annoyed female voice answered. "Atlantic Realty, how can I help you?" "Hello," John said, trying to keep his tone as friendly as possible. "I'm calling about the house at 13 Elmwood Drive, Providence. I'm a paranormal investigator, and I'm assisting your tenants, Sherry and Niecy." Before John could finish, her tone instantly changed, becoming sharp and filled with suspicion. "What on earth are you talking about, paranormal? Are you trying to take advantage of those young women? I've heard these tricks before. What are you trying to do? Claim the house is haunted to force a cheap buyout. Is that it?" John tried to explain. "No, you misunderstand. We just want to find out the cause of the strange occurrences to help them." "Help what help?" she snapped, cutting John off. "You people are just scammers, let me tell you. If I see you lurking around my office again, or dare to contact me, I will call the police immediately. Is that clear?" Her words were like sharp knives, piercing John's ears. Her hostility and contempt truly surprised him. John tried to calm down, taking a deep breath. "So, can you give me the owner's phone number?" "Never, don't even think about it. Hang up now." And with that, she slammed the phone down without another word. John held the phone for a moment, feeling as if a bucket of cold water had been dumped on him. The agent's skepticism and aggressive attitude made him suspicious. Why was she reacting so violently? Was she hiding something about the house? Or was she simply overly skeptical? Either way, the door to information through this channel was completely slammed shut. This made John realize that this case was not just a simple ghost investigation. It might contain many more secrets. The cost of recklessness. Friday, July 20th, 2023, the day set for the official investigation at Sherry and Niecy's house. Initially, John's entire team planned to participate. John, Liza, and her husband Wynand, along with Nate. They were a cohesive team, each with their strengths, always supporting and protecting each other in the most chilling investigations. Liza was sensitive to psychic energy. Wynand was an equipment expert, and Nate was excellent at recording EVP electronic voice phenomena. However, on that fateful day, something unexpected happened. John couldn't reach Liza and Wynand. Their phones were both off. This was truly strange, as they were very responsible and had never missed an investigation before. A feeling of unease rose in John's heart. His intuition told him something was wrong. It was only later that John learned Liza had been rushed to the hospital for an unknown reason. He wouldn't go into details here, only that she was fine and recovered, but their sudden absence completely disrupted their plans. Their first mistake proceeding with the investigation without the entire team, John felt this threw them off balance. Their team was built on trust and mutual support. When a member was absent, especially Liza, who had a very strong intuition, John felt as if a part of their protective shield had been removed. He had a strong feeling they should cancel. His whole body seemed to scream, urging him to stop. Their second mistake, not trusting their own instincts. John ignored his intuition, ignored the inner voice warning of potential danger. Perhaps it was due to enthusiasm, or perhaps a desire to help Sherry and Nietzsche quickly. Whatever the reason, it was a wrong decision that they would pay for. Before picking up Nate, John performed his personal protection ritual. He believed in creating an energy shield around himself before confronting any negative entities. He silently recited prayers, visualizing a white light enveloping him, warding off all evil. When John arrived to pick up Nate, he reminded Nate to do the same. "Just wait a moment. I'll do my protection ritual," Nate said, but time was tight. They were already running late. "All right," Nate sighed. "Let's go. We're late." Their third mistake, John didn't insist that Nate perform the protection ritual, partly due to haste, partly because he trusted Nate's experience. He thought Nate was strong enough to protect himself or had his own methods. But John was wrong. That very complacency opened a dangerous breach. Dusk fell. Around 6 p.m., they arrived just before sunset. The scene upon their arrival sent chills down John's spine. Sherry and Niecy were standing by their car, dozens of yards from the house, as if taking refuge. Niecy, usually strong, was now incredibly agitated, constantly looking back at the house, then turning to John, her eyes pleading. Sherry, meanwhile, it looked like a deer caught in headlights. She stood motionless, her face ashen, eyes wide and vacant, blinking continuously as if trying to ward off a haunting image. Both girls were trembling violently, and John could read a clear message in their eyes. They just wanted to get out of there immediately, not wanting to linger for another second. Sherry timidly handed John the keys, her hands cold and shaking. She didn't say a word, just nodded slightly. Then she and Niecy quickly got into their car and sped off into the deepening night. Their haste further confirmed that this house was far from normal. Abyss of shadows. John and Nate stood before the house. Now, without the golden sunlight, it appeared clearer in the dim twilight, a decaying and ominous structure. Each black window was like an empty eye socket, staring at them. The wind whistled through the dry branches, sounding like someone whispering curses. When John pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside, a sense of gloom immediately enveloped him. The air in the house was thick, heavy, as if an invisible wall separated it from the outside world. The smell of dampness, dust, and an indescribable, pungent, metallic odor assaulted his nostrils. It wasn't the smell of death, but of decay, of something that had died long ago, yet still lingered. The hairs on John's neck and arms stood on end. The chill wasn't from temperature, but from an invisible energy radiating throughout the space. Although John had performed his protection ritual, this presence was still too strong, too terrifying. He felt as if hundreds of invisible eyes were watching their every move, from the shadows, from hidden corners, from the very peeling walls. Nate, usually so enthusiastic and active in every investigation, was completely different now. As they began their preliminary sweep of each room, he seemed much more subdued. His face, which usually held a slight contemplative look, now showed a heavier, more melancholic expression, as if an invisible burden was pressing down on him. His eyes darted around the space with a confused look, occasionally flickering with an indescribable fear. At first, he still had some excitement as he checked the equipment, but soon after, that excitement vanished, replaced by a blank, despondent look. John noticed the distinct change in Nate's mood. He became quieter, his movements slower. John observed Nate, sometimes seeing him shiver slightly, or suddenly stop mid-stride as if listening to an unseen sound. "Nate," John quietly asked, his voice also dropping to a whisper in the house's eerie silence. "Do you want to call it a night and come back another day when the whole team can be here?" Nate gently shook his head, his lips pressed tightly. "It's okay. I just feel a bit down. I'm fine." But John knew Nate wasn't fine. The down Nate spoke of wasn't ordinary fatigue, but something heavier, something trying to invade his mind, weakening his will. John felt a growing sense of unease. After the preliminary sweep, Nate suggested they each take a bedroom and begin an EVP, electronic voice phenomena session. He wanted to record voices, Whispers from the other side. Splitting up will give us a better chance to gather evidence, Nate said, his voice sounding a little forced. John was slightly uneasy about them splitting up. In investigations like this, safety lay in staying together, supporting each other. This house, with its ominous feel and the strong presence John sensed, truly unnerved him. John knew a paranormal investigator shouldn't easily let emotions overwhelm them, but his intuition was screaming. "Are you sure?" John asked, his voice slightly tense. "I don't feel entirely comfortable with us splitting up here." But Nate insisted, "It's fine, just for an hour. We'll meet back in the living room." Against his better judgment, John agreed. Their fourth mistake. John chose Sherry's room, the room where she had experienced the most terrifying things. Nate went into Nisi's room. They agreed to meet back in the living room after an hour to compare results. John walked into Sherry's room. The room was bare, with only an old bed pushed against the wall and a simple wardrobe. The window was slightly ajar, the wind whistling through the gap, sounding like someone sobbing. There was the smell of dampness and a faint, sweet scent of jasmine, but not a pleasant one. It was the scent of withered jasmine, steeped in a funereal atmosphere. This smell sent shivers down John's spine, as if a funeral wreath had been placed in the room. John placed the voice recorder on the table, turned on the EVP recording mode, and began his question and answer session. "Is anyone here?" he whispered, his voice low, trying to maintain composure. "If so, please make a sound. Please tell us your name." The silence was terrifying. John could only hear his own heart pounding in his chest and the wind whistling through the window. He continued to ask questions, listening for the slightest sound. Sometimes, he felt a cold draft on his neck or a sensation as if someone was standing behind him. But when he turned, there was nothing. John told himself it was just his nerves. 20 minutes passed, and John was still immersed in his EVP session. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed, startling him. The door to John's room, which had been closed, burst open. He spun around. Nate was standing at the doorway, his face ashen, eyes wide with terror, and sweat pouring down him. His whole body trembled violently, as if he had just experienced an extreme shock. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving. John had never seen Nate in such a state. "Nate, what happened?" John asked, his voice also turning to panic. Nate said nothing, just shook his head frantically. His eyes darted around, then looked at John, as if wanting to say something but unable to utter a word. I have to go," Nate stammered, his voice hoarse, completely lost. I have to go now." John knew something truly terrible had happened. He didn't ask further, because he saw the extreme terror gripping Nate. John quickly gathered his equipment, turned off the recorder, and followed Nate into the living room. Nate had already begun packing their gear, his hands shaking, causing the recorders, cameras, and sensor devices to clatter. He did everything in a rush, almost throwing things around, as if wanting to escape this place as quickly as possible. "Nate, tell me what happened in your room," John asked again, trying to calm him. Nate still shook his head. "No, not now. I just want to go home." John had no choice but to comply. He knew that forcing Nate to speak wouldn't yield any results, and might even make him more panicked. John just wanted to get Nate out of that terrifying house as soon as possible. A midnight confession. John drove Nate home, all the way. Nate sat silently, huddled in the passenger seat, his eyes staring out the window, but seemingly seeing nothing. His face was still pale, and occasionally John would see him shiver slightly. John tried to make conversation, but Nate only replied with curt uh-huhs or ahs. An invisible fear had locked him in. For over a week afterward, John heard nothing from Nate. His phone was off, messages unanswered. Nate's silence made John extremely worried. This wasn't the Nate John knew. The day after the investigation, John returned to Sherry and Nisi's house on Elmwood Drive to retrieve the keys. The house still stood there, ominous and silent in the daylight. John went inside, alone, and the lingering sense of gloom was still present, but not as strong and terrifying as the night before. He quickly found the keys and left. Throughout that week, John received calls from Sherry and Nietzsche. Their voices were filled with relief and cheerfulness. "Thank you so much, sir. Since that night, we haven't had any experiences. The house feels much lighter," Sherry said, her voice full of life, no longer panicked as before. John felt immense relief. He didn't want to frighten them further, so he didn't tell them about what had happened to Nate or his sudden change. John simply said they had performed some rituals and hoped everything would be well. He was glad they felt comfortable in their own home, even though John knew something still lurked there. A few days later, John's phone rang. It was Nate. His voice was weak and sounded tired. "I need to talk to you," Nate said. "Can you come to my place?" John agreed immediately. Within an hour, he was at Nate's doorstep on Maple Street in suburban Boston. As John walked in, a chillingly familiar sensation enveloped him. The gloomy, heavy feeling, the bone-chilling cold, and the withered jasmine scent. It was exactly like what John had experienced in Sherry and Niecy's house. John knew immediately. The entity had followed him. They went to sit on the porch, away from the heavy atmosphere inside. Nate looked at John, his eyes bloodshot, his face gaunt, and his whole body seemed to have wasted away. He no longer had his usual energetic, strong demeanor, but instead a complete breakdown. John clearly saw the extreme fear clinging to Nate, like an inseparable shadow. After a moment of silence, Nate began to tell his story. His voice was low, hoarse, as if each word had to struggle against an invisible weight. "When I went into Niecy's room, I started my EVP session. Everything was normal for the first 5 minutes. I was asking questions and listening. Then suddenly," he paused, taking a deep breath. His eyes closed as if trying to ward off a terrifying image. "I felt a large, cold hand clamp onto my shoulder. It wasn't a gentle touch, but a strong, brutal grip. It was like a steel vice, squeezing me tightly. At the same time, I heard a voice, my son's voice, whispering right next to my ear, saying just one word, 'Dad.' Nate trembled, his whole body recoiling. John could feel the horror Nate was reliving as he recounted it. His son's voice calling Dad could have been an illusion, a cunning deception by the entity to make him drop his guard, or a genuine message from a trapped spirit. Whatever it was, it had touched the most vulnerable point in a father's heart. Even though the room was pitch black, Nate continued, his voice a whisper, I could still vaguely see furniture around me in the darkness. But as soon as I turned my head to look at what was gripping my shoulder, everything went utterly black. It wasn't the darkness of the room, but a completely different kind of blackness. It was like I had been instantly blinded. I couldn't see anything, completely submerged in an endless, dense blackness. Nate clenched his fist, his nails digging into his skin, and I felt like I was falling, not falling on the ground, but falling into a bottomless abyss. I couldn't remove the hand gripping my shoulder. It felt nailed there. I felt trapped, held tightly in that terrifying darkness, not knowing where I was or what was happening. He paused, gasping for breath, as if he had just run a marathon. Finally, somehow, I got up. I don't know how. I just remember running out of that room, running to find you. John. Now John understood. The horror Nate experienced was not merely simple fear, but a direct attack on his mind and will. The entity had tried to isolate him, disorient him, and completely immerse him in darkness. Its use of his son's voice was an extremely insidious psychological attack. The unyielding shadow. Since that fateful night, Nate's life had become a series of terrifying events. The entity, which had latched onto him from Sherry and Niecy's house, relentlessly tormented his life and his family. Everything started changing in my house. John, Nate continued, his voice filled with despair. All the plants in my house, from small potted flowers to large ones, withered and died within a week, even though my wife still cared for them as usual. This was a clear sign of negative energy. Negative spirits often drain life energy, causing plants and pets to weaken. Then one time, Nate recounted, my microwave caught fire while the whole family was asleep. Luckily, the fire alarm went off. Otherwise, I don't know what would have happened. This showed that the entity wasn't just limited to psychological torment, but also had the ability to cause physical harm, posing a direct threat to life. My son, he started having terrible nightmares every night, Nate said, his voice choked with worry for his child. He kept screaming in his sleep, calling out to some dark shadow. It haunted him so much that he wouldn't dare sleep alone anymore. Children are often more sensitive to the spiritual world, and Nate's son's terrifying dreams were an alarming sign. The entity was trying to sow fear even into the innocent. And my wife, she was touched while showering, Nate recounted, his eyes wide, filled with outrage and pain. She said it felt like someone was stroking her hair. Then a cold hand touched her back, then her chest. She screamed and ran out of the bathroom. The next morning, there was a large bruise on her chest, shaped like a handprint. I couldn't protect her. John, I felt so helpless. The physical attack on Nate's wife was an extremely dangerous sign. It showed that the entity was becoming stronger and bolder. It didn't just want to scare, but also to inflict harm. Nate, as the man of the house, felt utterly defeated in protecting his loved ones. This fear had turned into helplessness and despair. Finally, Nate sighed, his voice sounding relieved but also bitter. I had to send my wife to stay with her parents. I didn't want her to suffer anymore. The fact that Nate had to send his wife and child away was a clear testament to the seriousness of the situation. He had sacrificed his family's happiness to protect them from an invisible danger. Nate had tried many ways to banish the entity. He had burned incense, scattered salt, lit candles and prayed, but no method could remove it. The entity seemed to grow stronger and cling tighter each day. Since you're a Catholic, I suggested you call a priest to bless the house, John told Nate. You should also come stay at my place overnight, at least until things settle down. But Nate shook his head, his eyes showing extreme fear. No, I don't want to. I'm afraid I'll bring whatever is clinging to me and harm your family. His fear had turned into isolation. He was willing to suffer alone to protect those around him from the danger he was carrying. That night, Nate slept in his car, parked right outside his house. A strong, resilient man, now forced to huddle in his own car, terrified of an invisible entity haunting his home. The next day, John arranged for a priest from St. Jude's Parish to bless Nate's house. The priest was an elderly man with a kind appearance but eyes that exuded determination and strength. He walked through each room, sprinkling holy water and reciting powerful prayers. John stood beside Nate, observing the priest's every gesture. As he spoke the final words, John felt a gentle, cleansing energy spread throughout the house, dispelling the heavy, gloomy atmosphere. It seemed to work. Since the blessing, there have been no more incidents. Nate's house returned to peace. Paths of destiny. After all that had happened, Nate abandoned his paranormal investigations. He no longer wanted to risk himself and his family. He realized that the spiritual world was not a game, and there were forces they couldn't control. The fear and haunting had completely changed his life. Nate had lost his enthusiasm, his curiosity, and even the courage he once possessed. He became more withdrawn, quieter, and sometimes John still saw a hint of anxiety in his eyes, as if he could still see the dark shadow in that dark room. John's team also went their separate ways. Liza and Winans still continued their work, but John and Nate took different paths. John was still undecided about his future in this field. Should he find another team, or start a new one himself, or should he give it up entirely? The experience with Nate left a deep scar on John. It was not just a lesson in caution and the importance of self-protection, but also a reminder of the real risks, the price to pay when one steps into the world of the unexplainable. Sherry and Nisi's house at 13 Elmwood Drive, Providence, the house of haunting whispers, may have returned to peace, but what happened inside it and what clung to Nate will forever be a terrifying warning. Fear comes not only from physical ghosts, but also from the psychological scars they leave, the lingering obsessions, and the permanent changes in the lives of those who have encountered them. And John knew, no matter which path he took, the ghost of that house and the whisper of Nate's son in the darkness would forever echo in his mind. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Tina Shadow Stories so you don't miss our next chilling tales. See you in the next video.